which has been observed over the recent 30 years. And this is due to increasing ocean warming, we looked at the data on the previous slide, and increased loss of mass from glaciers and ice sheets. That was also on the previous slide of the observations. So when we look at the projections which are shown in this graph, we see projections of 1 to 3 feet of sea level rise globally are possible by the end of the 21st century. Now, why do we care? We care about these observations and projections because of impacts that these changes will have on our physical, biological, ecological, and social systems. So here is what the IPCC is saying about the impacts of the sea level rise. We know that coastal systems are particularly sensitive to sea level rise, to sea level, ocean temperature, and ocean acidity. Because high CO2 increases ocean acidity as well as warming the temperatures. We know that they will increase, as we just saw in the southeast part of our country, these will increasingly experience adverse impacts, that the population and assets exposed to the coast will be exposed to these risks and will increase significantly in the coming decades. And that word increase is a very, very critical challenge to all of us gathered here today. And the IPCC also is giving an overall opinion, a scientific finding that the benefits of protecting from these challenges outweigh the costs of inaction. And this is a very critical cost-benefit calculation that they have done and are bringing forward. So now let's turn to the national assessment that just came out yesterday, that many of our scientific colleagues have worked on. So here, just as we pulled the part on the coast, and guess what? A lot of what the findings are echo the IPCC. What's true globally is also true nationally. Coastal zones are increasingly vulnerable to higher sea level rise, storm surges, inland flooding, and other climate-related changes. They increase the exposure of the assets, including the ports that are such a topic of our gathering today, tourism and fishing. And that, but they also add a very key point here about the socioeconomic disparities, that not all people are uniformly vulnerable, that our poorer communities, our lower socioeconomic groups may be especially and are likely to be especially vulnerable. And we certainly saw this in response to Hurricane Sandy here in New York City. So in our whole region, that's the national view, in our region, we have the Consortium for Climate Risk in the Urban Northeast, which is a NOAA-funded project. And we bring scientists together and stakeholders together from Boston all the way to Philadelphia. And Bradley Horton, who is here, is one of the main leaders of CC Run, and CC Run is a co-host of the event today. So let me turn now right down here to New York City. So as Bob mentioned, work has been done on the increasing risks due to climate change and preparing for them for over 15 years here in the New York metropolitan region. Just turning to what happened starting in 2008, Mayor Bloomberg, the mayor at that time, convened the New York City Panel on Climate Change to provide a set of climate projections for the city. Because those global numbers, those national numbers, but when we come to regions, we have to know what's going to happen right here so the decision makers and plans can be taking the localized projections. And that all got going starting in 2008, and we published those projections in 2010. But then something happened on October 29th, 2012, which was Hurricane Sandy. I won't go through all the science of the storm. It was a very unusual storm for this region. With the storm track, the high tide, the extent of it, over 1,000 miles wide. One thing that was very encouraging, I think, is that the storm was forecast well in advance. Our National Weather Service did a very good job with some help from European colleagues. So the storm hit. And it was well forecast in terms of the storm. What about the impacts? Were they well forecast? Because of all these reports that we'd all been working on, this one high on the left was the one that we started over 15 years ago. Many of the impacts also were foreseen well in advance, so it wasn't a surprise. When the subways flooded, we had projected that, and where you can see the maps that we had made showing the vulnerable areas, the coastal effects, the energy shortages, the power outages. But there were unforeseen impacts as well in regard to the fires in some of the key coastal communities, the hospital evacuations, and of course, gas shortages. So we didn't do a complete job of understanding, and we have to continue to do a better job. So right after Hurricane Sandy, Mayor Bloomberg reconvened the scientists and experts to come together to provide updated climate projections for the rebuilding. And that's called the Special Initiative for Rebuilding and Resiliency. And I just, in the beginning, in the front cover of that report is the definition of resilience. What does it mean to be resilient? Able to bounce back after change or adversity, capable of preparing for, responding to, and recovering from difficult conditions. Then, see the synonym, tough, and see also New York City. So we then, based on the IPCC projections and our own local knowledge and our own science expertise here, made projections for right here of what the sea level rise projections will be. We always give them in a range so that decision makers can take, who have different risk profiles, can choose their levels. But just to say, let's say by the 2100 in the middle range, 22 inches, it's basically 2 to 4 feet of sea level rise are projected to occur right here in New York City. And then we work with geographers. Bill Selecki, the co-chair with me of the New York City Panel on Climate Change, he leads the mapping of and this is for the storms, of what the future coastal flood risk maps are. And we also now work with FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, as well as NOAA, the NOAA Coastal Mapper team, so that all the telescoping scales can be utilizing the very best information at the individual scales. So the SNIR put forward many plans and ideas for a stronger, more resilient New York. And the key point here is what I would say the word is a portfolio. So they drew on the expertise of all the city and region, and created a plan for rebuilding for the $20 billion. That's really the estimate of how much it will actually take to recover from Hurricane Sandy. And in terms of the adaptation, what we need to be doing is staying below that acceptable societal level of risk. And the green wavy line means that we have to not only adapt and develop resilience, but we have to be mitigating and reducing greenhouse gases at the same time. We develop steps of assessment and implementation, co-generated with the Task Force on Climate Change here that Mayor Bloomberg also started. And this portfolio approach, which is the final idea that I want to leave you with, is that it's easy to sort of choose one way that we should be, let's sort of all get on board and choose one particular approach, engineering approaches, for example. But really, it's a portfolio of approaches with policies, and we heard some about that from Kristen, engineering approaches to resilience, ecosystem-based adaptation, what to do with wetlands, what to do with oyster beds, what to do with our wetlands, and our social vulnerability as well. What can we do to strengthen our neighborhoods in their social fabric? So this is my last slide. That Hurricane Sandy, and I think this is very germane to everything that we've heard so far, and I think is germane to the whole day. That Hurricane Sandy, certainly here for this region, but I believe actually nationally, actually because we work internationally, I think internationally as well, that is a tipping point. It was a tipping point. In climate science, we have tipping points in terms of the physical processes slowly accumulating and then having a big increase in rate of change. I think that's what's happening now, that we're having leadership in responding to climate change that is coming forward. We have climate science, what I call in place and in time, and now with the national assessment, we have that for the entire country. And we have municipal, state, and federal alignment, because that's what it really takes to truly create a resilient nation. So we need federal coordination, but that federal coordination needs to recognize the local and state initiatives, just as we heard from Christian. And turning to the topic of the day, public and private partnerships as well. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.